Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Knowledge Hub that we at HTA have been putting together with Eye to Eye, the Glee organisers. Good to see so many of you here, and I hope that we'll be able to keep you here for the next 35, 40 minutes or so. And who knows, one or two people might join us along the way, which would be fantastic. We've got a very interesting subject this morning, and we've got a very expert panel here to share their views with us as to how, as an industry here in gardening, we can be targeting a younger gardener. So that's sort of very much sort of the subject that we're going to be sort of working through here. I'm Andrew Maxted, the marketing director at the HTA, and we do a lot of work in this sector. And we know, as you will, that gardening is a 5 billion plus business. I mean, it is a huge market. And we perhaps very often think of gardeners as being typically very, very much sort of older people, and we would look at sort of the 55 plus market and the 45 plus perhaps. And think that's really where all of the activities happening around our garden centres and our other garden retail outlets. But actually, the reality in the picture is actually much, much more broad than that. And indeed, we do find it's the 35 to 45 and the 45 to 55-year-olds that are really driving the power spending on their gardens. And once people start getting into those older segments, they may be visiting garden centres a little bit more regularly because they've got the time, but they're not necessarily spending as much money in garden centres and spending as much money on plants and garden products and helping support, sustain and drive forward our industry. So we're going to do a little bit of talk around that this morning. As I say, got an expert panel here, and I just want to sort of take a few moments to introduce them to you. At the far end here on my right, your left, Paula Parker. She's the UK Marketing Director for the Scots Miracle-Gro Company. She's been in that role for the last 4 years, but she brings, I can't believe it, 20 years of experience to the industry. So knows her stuff when it comes to new product development and marketing, and has got quite a few very, very successful new product innovations under her belt, as it were, with the Scots Miracle-Gro Patch Magic that was introduced. Was it 2 years ago, Paula, that hit the market? 3 years ago now. And what an impact that has had. And I know from having been onto the Scots stand, the Flower Magic product being launched here today, or this show, very, very much looking forward to seeing what impact that will have in the market next year. So Paula has got a few stories around some of those things to share with us. Next to Paula is my colleague from the HTA, Dave Denny. Dave actually runs our market information program, and what Dave hasn't learned in the couple of years that he's been with us at the HTA about the garden market and the gardening consumer probably isn't worth knowing. Dave again tells me he's been doing this game for 15 years, but again, I really don't believe that. But Dave, great that you're able to get out of other meetings and join us here this morning as well. Next to Dave, Mandy, holding the microphone there. Mandy Morrison. Mandy's the RHS Schools Regional Advisor for the North West and has come down from Manchester this morning. And we all know, and I'm sure we admire the work that RHS has been doing with schools gardening and their schools gardening campaign over the last couple of years, and certainly very much looking forward to hearing from Mandy about some of the work that she's been doing and some of her previous experience, both as a schools gardener, as a garden designer, and as a mum of 4. So knows a little bit about marketing to the children. Next to Mandy, we've got Darren Major. Darren, for those of you who haven't come across Darren, he's the plant area manager at Burston Garden Centre in St Albans, and Darren comes into this sector from some very strong background experience with the John Lewis Partnership. And for anybody who's been down to Burston, I mean, it really does shine through when you look around the plant area, that you can see sort of that the inspiration, the convenience and the customer service that Darren says what really drives his approach to the business there really do shine through. And our fifth panellist this morning is Brian Pinker. Brian was for 20 years the Managing Director of Burrell Floraprint. Brian has been a very, very keen observer of the garden centre visitor and particularly the plant area visitor over very many years. What Brian doesn't know about printing plastic labels and the information that one needs to put onto those plant labels, again, probably isn't worth knowing. And Brian works very closely now with Hortipack and is advisor to them and helping to drive the Hortipack offer out to nurseries and garden centres as well. And little plug for HTA, making very good use of the HTA garden spender segmentation. That's one of the products that Dave's developed for us over the last couple of years. So that's sort of who we are, and that's the subject that we are very, very much going to be talking about and with and through over the next, as I say, sort of 30 minutes or so. We'll start off with an easy sort of starter for 10. I've got some questions here that various people have put through to me. We've got what I think is, I hope, is quite a sort of an easy, soft question to sort of get things going. But just because I've got a little stack of questions in front of me, that doesn't mean to say that you can't ask questions yourself as well. I very much hope that you will do that. And we do have a roving microphone, which is at the back there. Yeah, well, wave there. So if you want to ask a question when I call for them, please do, and I would just ask, please, do wait until you've got the mic before you start answering the question, because there is an awful lot of background noise, and I wouldn't want anybody to miss out on any of the pearls of wisdom that panel members are going to be able to share with us today. So, yeah, I mean, sort of, the first question I've got here is, yeah, how do we define younger gardens within our business, and what are we doing within our business to attract and bring younger gardeners to us? And Paula, can you start at the far end there? Give us a few words about how you at Scott's would define younger gardener.
Yes, thank you, Andrew. Well, obviously at Scott's Miracle-Gro, being a manufacturer, we have quite a large marketing department. So we have facilities to hand which perhaps garden centres wouldn't have, but what we can pass on is some of the messages that we have. So what we do is, traditionally, as you were saying earlier on, Andrew, we were looking at the 45 plus age group for garden sundries products. What we have been doing over the last few years is looking much more at the younger consumer. So for us, from a marketing strategy point of view, we're talking about the 35 to 45-year-olds. And then also, more recently, in the last 2 to 3 years, we're also focusing on children and school children, particularly between the age of 5 and 11. Having said that, as part of our Miracle Growers program that we've been working on with Peter Seabrook and the Sun, we've had children in nurseries as young as 2, 3-year-olds planting up products in our compost, and also with seeds supplied from some of the seed manufacturers and donated to these areas. So, but from a pure marketing point of view, we do look, we segment it in terms of 35-year-olds. So we're looking at the young families, parents with children from 5 to 11-year-olds as part of the family, and we call them lifestylers in my team. So we're looking at branding, and Miracle-Gro particularly suits those sorts of people. So we're looking at products which are easy to use, that give those busy consumers a really good, quick and easy result in the garden. So what they don't want to do is fail. So you want to catch them when they come into the garden centre, have some nice theatre, something that they can see what the result is going to be, because they don't have the experience of gardening. They don't really know what to expect, how to do it, and they think it's all a bit difficult. It's not like when we were kids, my parents and my grandparents taught me how to garden, and I remember digging up potatoes in my granddad's allotment as a young girl. We don't have that luxury these days. My parents live, 100 or so miles away from me now, and I've never lived close to them since I've had children. So although I'm passing that knowledge on, there's not many like me out there anymore in this kind of 35 to 45-year-old age group. So we're trying to help them, give them products that they can use, a one-stop shop, put it down, give it some water, and it will grow. So the Patch Magic product we're talking about, and Flower Magic, where you get seed and everything as part of the product. And then the relationship with those people, having the other thing is not just the product, but it's the communication. And these younger consumers need a different method of messaging. So they will watch TV advertising, and so we are careful in our programming, but more typically they'll be online. So it's a new marketing tool that we're having to learn. And there was a panel here yesterday talking about social media and Twitter, which was very interesting for me to learn about and see that garden centres are doing more of that. And the more you can do to bring your local community into your store and inform them with this online type communication, I think the better.
Paula, thank you very much indeed for that, and you bring in some very useful points there about communication and the new tools that we're all having to learn. Perhaps we could just pass the baton to Mandy and just ask Mandy to give sort of an RHS view on how within RHS you see younger gardeners. Is RHS membership sort of typically sort of 55 plus, and is it anybody under 55? Would you go lower than that?
Oh yeah, we do have definitely an under 55 demographic, but like you say, traditionally gardening, certainly when I was growing up, was for older people. Certainly garden centres were for, I'm afraid to say, the more retired section of the community. Whereas now, we're pushing the message through into the schools. We've missed a generation, as you said, and we're trying to get children just to have an absolute passion of gardening. Personally, I grew up not really understanding it till I was in my late 20s, grew a seed, got the bug, was absolutely smitten with it, and decided to work in the industry. And I think if you can get kids of that age to get the bug, if you can get out there into schools, you can incorporate into the curriculum with the ideal thing, actually get the teachers embracing it, the whole school's embracing it, is what we're trying to do. But get the kids outdoors, healthy environment, growing, possibly stuff they can eat, which is even better. So you've got the nutrition aspects of it as well. But just if they can get the bug, they will then, as we were saying before, I've got parents coming up to me at school saying, I want a word with you. And I'm thinking, oh God. Because of you, we've had to go down the garden centre and buy, I will not say how much stuff, compost and pots and raised beds. And they're actually smiling though, because they've said we've had a brilliant time. Kids come home from their school gardening club with a leek or a strawberry or something, and it's generated this amazing push then for the parents to have to go and get organised and get out there in their own back gardens and do the same thing. And from your point of view, that's obviously great news. And I think it's a really, really powerful thing that shouldn't be ignored on the retail side of things.
Okay. Mandy, thank you very much indeed. But let's just keep coming along the road. Let's move to Darren. And at Burston Garden Centre, Darren, how are you defining young gardener and what are you doing to attract them?
Well, it has to be said again that the average age of our customer has dropped. We still have a two-tone client base. We have a Monday to Friday customer, which tends to be the 55, and then we have the weekend customers, which is dropping down to 35 young families, which comes hand in hand with the children, and they're coming in with their children. So the key thing that we've spent a lot of time doing is listening to our customers and not just listening to their questions, but listening to them as they're walking around the centre and finding out what their problems are and reacting to that. So obviously providing things for keep the kids entertained while the parents are having a look around. So we have little wildlife hunts, colouring competitions and all this kind of stuff, all focused on wildlife and growing and such like. But also providing an easy environment for the parents as well, because the parents are less experienced and have less knowledge than their parents and their grandparents. So it's providing plants and marketing plants in a way in which they can find what they're looking for, providing good grow your own. There's still good grow your own sales out there if we can get the schools involved, if the suppliers are gearing their products towards children as well, then we're just creating a happy little family vibe really, and that's what we're trying to do at the garden centre. It is a place for all of those people.
I particularly like, Darren, the importance you're attaching to walking your own plant area and listening to your customer reaction to what you're doing and getting that very, very instant feedback.
Earwigging is worth its weight in gold.
Earwigging, absolutely. Thank you very much. Brian, you've been a very close observer of gardening and garden centres, plant areas particularly over many years. What's your take on this question?
Well, I think firstly you have to remember that young is a relative term. I've at the moment got a 95-year-old mother at home who will be frantically gardening at the moment and sees me as the young gardener, which I have to do when I go home and help her. But the reality is that the young gardeners are also even the people at 25, 30, like, say, my daughter, who suddenly goes out, actually buys her own home, then goes and buys a few grow-your-own patio plants, and actually has fantastic success, and actually then starts, hey, Dad, I'm beginning to understand what you like about the gardening, because you're always thinking about the future and thinking about tomorrow. So the reality, though, I think, is the young people you really have to get into are the 5 to sort of 11-year-olds, because it's rather like the banks that try and hook you to the first bank account, and then once they've got you for life. Well, we really want to get the young people out there into the garden centres, actually seeing the beauty of growing a seed and seeing what comes out of it. There's a tremendous amount of future and life there, yet it also links to the ecology and the whole environment. So there's a massive amount of issues that are available for schools for the educational point of view, but to get that enthusiasm of people seeing the success of actually growing things from themselves, you get into the pester power, which then comes back to people wanting to buy the products in the garden centres. Over the years, the garden centres are clearly beginning to recognise that you need to do things like that. I remember being in Reinhard Bieler at Bay Tree Garden Centre in Spalding, who had a whole load of spare primulas one year, and he was rushing around giving these primulas out to the young kids, saying, here, go home, grow that and enjoy it. And it's that sort of enthusiasm to get people on board that I think we need to address.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I mean, the importance of pester power coming over very strong there, and I think, Mandy, that was the point that you were making. It was very much the parents, the children are getting excited, and then they're coming down the garden centre and spending. Can we go to Dave? Dave, I mean, you and I, we spent a lot of time at HTA looking at this market over the last couple of years. What would be the key points that you would throw in at this point of the conversation?
I think to re-emphasise that the definition of young is potentially very, very flexible, and certainly in our experience is driven by some key life events, so the presence of children, purchase of first home, etc. I think one thing to add to that is the pester power angle, and certainly what we're seeing in the wider industry is that children are becoming more active participants in their parents' decision making, whether that's for groceries, leisure, DVD, games, etc., to the extent which, where I was at a seminar last week where some research results were being presented where they'd experimented with putting products at the eye line of a typical 7-year-old with a view to getting it into the mother's basket, which was apparently proving quite successful. So we're seeing some real opportunities there to get into the interest and the excitement that's generated by the sunflower seed, and to really use that to generate visits to the garden centre and purchases.
Dave, thank you very much indeed. So there you have it. I mean, you've got a sort of a summary of how each of our panellists are seeing the market, and particularly the younger gardeners' place within all of this. I mean, is this ringing true to you here in the auditorium this morning? Yeah. Neil, you're nodding your head. Sorry. Can I just ask? Neil Grant from Ferndale Garden Centre in South Yorkshire. How are you seeing younger gardeners where you are?
Younger gardeners love gardening except when it's raining. And that's obviously our big issue, and we can't avoid it, and we've got to find ways of keeping them coming in. Wasn't quite gardening, but we did create a beach outside the coffee shop this summer, and that whole thing about kids pestering grandparents, in this case, to drag them back into the garden centre was fantastic. And it was quite interesting that the coffee shop was 7% up in August, but the garden centre was 9% down. So even though it was raining, because this was under glass, they were coming in, and it was a good excuse. So we shall do more next year in the summer period. And I think that's given me triggers now to try other things. I'm hoping to experiment with a kids' garden centre, which will only be about 10 feet long by 4 feet wide, but they'll have their own entrance into it. Just to get all those products together and just see if we can get a reaction from kids wanting to go to their own bit. Haven't managed it yet, but it's in here, so we'll see. We'll have a go next year.
Excellent. Neil, thank you very much indeed for that sort of intervention from the floor. Are there any questions anybody out there has got that you'd like to put to any of the panel on anything? Yeah, question here.
Hi, I'm Terry Jones. I'm from Joy of Plants. We produce plant information for garden centres, nurseries, and we have an iPhone app out for gardeners. I'd like to ask the panel, what role do you think technology plays in attracting younger gardeners? Because most of the time these days you see kids stuck to their phones or stuck to their parents' phones.
Well, can we go, Darren, to you? I mean, St Albans is an affluent area. I mean, do all the kids come in with their BlackBerries and their iPads?
No, not overly. When we say kids, I mean obviously, yeah, 11 to teenagers. Not so much. I mean we're trying to get on the social networks. Obviously with Twitter and Facebook, we do a lot of that sort of stuff. But I think we rely quite a lot on visual inspiration. So maybe we have to appeal to the younger parents first to bring the kids in, and then the kids will react to what we can show them in store, possibly. But we don't see them walking around. PR codes, they don't get used that often. So not by the sort of 9, 10, 11-year-olds, certainly.
Okay, Mandy.
Sorry, one of the questions you were thinking of asking was about how we could maybe use other examples of retailers and emulate them where they are very successful with children. I have a local bookshop, and I suppose you could say reading and writing are similarly uncool for an 11-year-old person to do, as is gardening. It's sort of on the scale. But they use internet an awful lot. They email all their previous customers with events that they're running. They have authors coming in, they get the kids in, they've got a great cafe, so they provide refreshments. The kids do workshops with the authors, so they sit down. And I was just thinking along the lines of doing that with a garden centre, if you have more sort of event-style stuff and you were using email to send out invitations, and maybe there was a hook with it, maybe during the school holidays they could have a competition, give out some free seeds, get the kids to come down, get their seeds and whatever, go away, grow as much as they can, get them to come back at the end of August and display what they've got. I don't know. But using email to do that. Also, we've got a website on the RHS for the schools gardening, which has an interactive section, so the kids can go on there and they can go into the virtual glass house and they can sort of, work their way around it. It's like a computer game, and they can sort of pick up bits and say, right, who needs, where's this most useful scientific inquiry for science? And they don't realise they're doing science, but it's just a bit more interesting. And there's not masses of linkage with technology, because obviously it's an outdoor environment. But if you can use email lists to get to your customers, if you can take email addresses, quite often my husband will forward me these emails saying, do you think any of the kids would be interested in going to do these workshops? So that they've got the emails of the adults, of the parents, but they're sending them out and invite your kids down to do this, that and the other.
Mandy, thank you very much indeed. Paula, I know you've been doing a fair bit of work in this area at Scott's.
Yeah, I think what I would like to say is that I think we are in our infancy in this technology, and the kids are way ahead of us. And I think that I think if we're talking about this in a year's time, it'd be very interesting to see from the floor where people are, because I would imagine quite a boom again this year. Every year, more people are getting involved in Facebook, Twitter. We heard about Pinterest yesterday, which is a more visual way, and which I think would tap into that younger community, particularly in the plants. And I can very much see that younger group taking photos, putting it onto Pinterest and sharing it with their friends, saying, look what I grew with Mum at the weekend, and the crops that we picked up, and then we cooked a great meal with the potatoes for dinner. So I think it's up to us as an industry to drive that and to provide the children with interesting information which taps into where they are today. And, the youth is driving that market. And that as they grow up, that's how we're going to be communicating to them in the future. It's not going to be newspapers and magazines in the same way as it is today. It's all going to be online, and whatever the new version of the tablets are by then is probably it's 3D virtual Glees by then, who knows. But I think it's up to us to drive that and to tap into that youth market and see how they want to communicate. And, why not when you set up your children's garden centre, have a Facebook page for it where the kids are saying, I like this, I went to this at the weekend.
Paula, thank you very much indeed. Dave, perhaps you could just, I know that there's a lot of research, consumer research you've been doing around the use of technology in the sector. What's your take on that?
Well, I think certainly in terms of under 45 demographic, if you like, when we were doing some consumer research last year, which involved following them around the shopping, the earwigging technique, focus groups and surveys. Part of that was to have a broad sweep of social media and look at what people were saying. And qualitatively and anecdotally, there was certainly a theme of people celebrating the work that they had done in their garden. So there was certainly one example there of someone celebrating his raised beds and what he'd achieved in that. And there was quite a long string of conversations, and the phrase that sticks out for me: when did handbags and nightclubs become vegetables? But it was cool for that generation. They were certainly celebrating the results and the satisfaction and the achievement. And I think as we become a more socially connected generation through the smartphone, through social networks, that really is an opportunity to celebrate that success and to associate ourselves with that sort of word of mouth through brands, outlets and so forth.
Thank you very much, Dave. And finally, Brian, I mean, again, Hortipack have been doing a lot of work with a lot of quite exciting technologies over the years. Any sign of that is sort of impacting particularly on younger gardeners?
I think the challenge is actually keeping up with events, because the kids are moving at a far faster rate than we are. Maybe the HTA ought to sponsor a farms game type app for gardening, because you're originally talking about the young children that are wanting to sort of play games, and you're really having to look at the segmentation of all the different levels through, from the young kids that want to play games through to the 12, 15-year-olds that are really wanting to just be cool with their friends. And therefore it's back to, yes, what are we going into the garden centre doing? What are we doing which is going to be liking? What are we eating tonight? Because of it's what we helped grow to make up to that, what we're cooking with. So unfortunately, the technology is one where, David, you need to get a panel of 5 to 12-year-olds and find out what it is that they actually want and what will turn them on, because it's very easy for us to try to spoon feed what we think they want, but actually, if you're doing proper consumer research, you're trying to find out what they want. And maybe we've got to be doing some reverse engineering and getting some play groups together and finding out what it is that's going to turn them on.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Brian. You remind me, I think yesterday, John Stanley, when he was speaking yesterday afternoon, was talking about a new gardening app, a new Farmville based around gardening, which I made a note of, and certainly when I next get back onto the PC, I'll be Googling that one and having a little look around that. I think absolutely none of us can ignore the march of technology, and it's good to see that there's a mix of tablets and smartphones being used in the audience this morning. So thank you very much for the question there. Is there another angle that anybody in the audience? Neil, hand up again.
Have any of you looked at the young market that's confined to apartments and flats? Because in the urban environment, in all cities now, the growth of those has just gone through the roof. And when I strain up to look at them, the sort of furniture I see on there has not come from garden centres, it's coming from the big stores. So how are we going to capture that market? Because they may stay in those apartments, but they may move into gardens eventually, and I'd like to try and see if we can catch them now.
Can we start, Mandy? Could you start off with that one? I mean, I imagine where you are in the northwest, you must be doing quite a lot of work with kids coming very much from urban environments and
absolutely,
inner city schools.
Yeah, we've got kids from Moss Side in Manchester living in flats, and one of my passions this year has been that, basically, vertical gardening. Anything like that can be done fairly cheaply. If you look around the show, you'll see different kits and systems and things. You can stick it to railings. You could even have it indoors in your kitchen with herbs and pick and mix salads, And again, for younger markets, you can get the kids doing strawberries and tomatoes and stuff. So all of that is very doable in flats, even without a balcony, as I say, almost indoors. The kids that don't have a garden come to school, and where we want to get in as well is to get into the schools. So the more you guys can work with schools and get those children growing in schools, then again you'll have the customers of the future, because when they do grow up, we planted 3 trees from the Woodland Trust back in March, and I was explaining to these kids who don't have a garden, who've never really gardened, that when they come back to school in 10 years' time with their children and they're all grown up, they're going to see a woodland here as opposed to just a plain playing field. And that just completely blew their heads, basically. But I'm hoping that those kids were so inspired that they will find other ways of gardening. They'll come back to school and use their grounds, to keep it going until they get their garden. So vertical gardening, pots, small. There's wonderful books on the subject of vertical gardening and just gardening in small spaces. So it can be done, definitely.
Mandy, thank you. Darren, I mean, what's your experience at Burston?
We've one of the things we've tried to promote this year, obviously still on the grow your own front, we're still driving that quite strongly, is growing in containers. So for those people with balconies or restricted areas, just highlighting and illustrating to them how it can be done. There are a few areas around where we are where there are less well-off families. So we've combined that with the recycling tact and planted up some of the more obscure household things that you might find to, again, encourage children to make it a bit more fun to grow your strawberry in the top of an old kettle or a saucepan. But again, it's just using container planting in restricted spaces, using hanging baskets to drop off of balconies. And as Mandy says, getting involved with the schools and going out to schools and letting the kids do it at the school, where they've more often than not got quite large areas of space.
Darren, thank you very much for that. Can you hang on to the microphone for a moment? Because the other half, I think, of the question that you posed there, Neil, was this question of, if many consumers are starting off on their first garden purchasing experience are in a DIY sheds, how then do we sort of wean them off that and bring them into the independent garden centre? And I guess, again, where you are in St Albans, you've got a lot of competition from bigger stores.
I think it's a natural progression rather than weaning them off. People, first-time buyers, have their priorities are always going to be on the inside of their properties, which comes hand in hand with the home bases and the B&Q. So they want to go there first, and they want to get the inside of the house done first. Gardening seems to take up a lot of people's time, so their priorities are different. And I think that natural weaning process happens. What we've got to try and do is make sure we don't lose our plant business to the likes of these people. While the sheds don't necessarily look after their plants as well as majority of garden centres, I think that's given us an edge. People want quality over price, certainly where I am in my experience, and they'd much rather come to somewhere where the plants are clearly looked after properly. So I think it's difficult to get them off of the sheds initially because that's where they're going to go. But the moment they come into the centres and then they realise actually in the centres that we do a little bit of indoor furniture, we do picture frames, I think that's when we've got to capitalise on keeping that by maintaining a product range which is different to the sheds, unique. It might be a little bit more expensive, but resonating quality rather than just sort of a bit budgety and what everyone else has got, really.
Yeah, but very much focusing on finding a point of differentiation other than price.
Yeah.
But yeah. Brian, you've got again, you've observed the market and will have seen this in practice.
Yes, I think we've got to accept that garden centres have got a real challenge in creating inspirational displays in terms of this is how you could do it. I mean, out there, for instance, there's some little small magnetic pot holders that show small plants that you could have on the side of a fridge and actually saying, hey, look, you can grow plants like this. But I was in the Range not very long ago, and I don't know whether most of you know that the Range is rather like a DIY come everything else sort of shop. And they actually had a wigwam of some vegetable plants and a complete little kit there saying, buy this for £49. And the point was that they were making an inspirational display, which actually had a simple price tag against it. So it was an opportunity to buy, and yes, I'll have that. That looks good value. And I can see what I could do. And it's giving people the idea that you could go away with this. Houseplants and growing herbs is the absolute obvious indoor starter kit for people because, then they're getting an actual feedback from particularly herbs again. So inspirational displays, I think, is the starting point to give people ideas.
Brian, thank you very much indeed for that. Paula, can I invite you to, obviously as a major supplier in the sector, you're supplying both independent garden centres and the DIY sector. What differences do you see in that market?
Well, I mean, obviously the clear advantage that garden centres have, as you were saying, is having the space and the creativity and the knowledge of your staff to develop these very inspirational displays. And that's a very clear difference. Often in the larger retailers, they don't dedicate the space to garden care as you would in a garden centre. And for that kind of market where you're whether living in apartments or have small spaces, perhaps the income is slightly lower. They're looking for inspiration as well. They don't. In my experience, certainly, and from the consumer research we've done, they tend to be perhaps younger people who don't have the knowledge. So, seeing something which is ready-made in a garden centre that they can emulate at home very quickly and easily, which will give them a very quick result, is what they're looking for. And I think you have the setup and the knowledge in-house to do that, which the larger retailers don't always have. One of the things we did with our Miracle Growers campaign in those sorts of areas of the country was that we gave away free 8-litre compost bags, and we just taught them and showed them, just if you lay it on its back and cut off the top, cut a square out, and just sow some seeds in that, you can have a real fun little lettuce garden just on your balcony. And some of the children in some of the lower income areas in the UK were doing that and carrying the bags into school when the salads were growing. You know, really, really excited that they'd grown their own produce at home, either on the windowsill or on the balcony.
Paula, thank you very much indeed. And Dave, I mean, does the market research bear this out, that there's a movement from the DIY sector into garden centres as people get older?
I think certainly that's very clear, the general movement towards garden centres as you move through the life stages and you get there. In terms of the question, how do you aid that, how do you facilitate that? It's almost worth turning it on its head to an extent. Certainly one of the influences on those younger gardeners is their parents, perhaps less than a generation ago, but still substantial and still significant. And I'm sure we've all seen people in the garden centre. It's the occasion where mum and grown-up daughter are shopping around for bedding plants. And that influence is brought to bear in the store. And so having those inspirational displays in place that are absolutely in tune with what they aspire from their gardens, home entertaining, the barbecue, safe place for the kids to play, the time to enjoy and socialise. That's a real opportunity there to use those visits, those occasions, to plant the seeds of the idea that think, you know what, this really is somewhere that's for us and this really has got value to add for us.
Thank you, Dave. I mean, the power of market information, market research, and some of the insights that you can draw from that. Thank you. Is there another question out there?
Hello, I'm Derek Dyer from Eggersford Garden Centre down in Devon. It's a question perhaps more for Darren. We've got a very mature customer base, and do you find if you're attracting lots of younger children in, the older customers don't like it so much? They come for a bit of peace and quiet to a garden centre, and I appreciate the need to attract the younger centres, but is there any practical experience you've got about how you balance that up with the needs of your sort of regular older customers who might be a little bit put off if there's kids running around and waving things at them and playing hopscotch in your paving slabs and all that sort of stuff?
To be honest, what we found is there's seems to be a clear difference on trading days of those. So we still have the older client, but they're generally a Monday to Friday. They've learned when the children aren't going to be there. So even half term, they sort of tend to disappear a little bit. The weekends is definitely heavy on younger families, younger kids, some of the kids running around, like you say, screaming and waving things all over the place. But I think you have to look at the younger families and you have to look at the younger children because they've got a lot more time left in them, they've got more mileage. So I don't want to cast aside the older generation, but they will find a quieter time to shop. You've probably got maybe down West Country a higher percentage of elderly people to what we have in St Albans anyway, but they will find their ways around it.
And I mean, can I ask, Darren, I mean, do you consciously change your merchandising, change your retail offer, change any of your signage to cater for the two markets?
It's a very difficult one to change. You can't change it overnight, and of course you can't put up different signs, and you can't remarket your whole plant area on a Monday morning and then change it again on a Friday for the weekend. So we are changing. We don't have an A to Z really anymore. It's all geared towards the younger people. I think the older generation who know what plant they're after, they'll know where to find it. Customer service is obviously crucial in our business, and we're always on tap to help people who might be walking around looking slightly bewildered. But again, most of our money doesn't come from the 55 plus. It's coming from the 35 to 45 group with the children. So we have to be realistic about how we market our products, and we are making the changes now. So as I say, no A to Z anymore, I'm afraid.
Darren, thank you very much. That was a garden centre orientated question, but Mandy?
I know I'm not a retailer from a garden centre, but I am a mum, and up until 10 years ago I wasn't into gardening very much either. And I looked upon garden centres as quite frightening if you're not horticulturally minded and you didn't know what you're looking for. And I would quite often nip down to B&Q instead. And I have to say, I'm thinking about this now, and I think the reason was that there was less choice at B&Q. It was seasonally marketed. So, you know, what to plant this month. And I'm just thinking, would it be an idea maybe to have a section like that? Love the idea of a section, a kids gardening, section, which maybe would mean the kids don't populate the rest of your garden centre, they stay there. But also maybe a section for new homeowners and the younger demographic to say, you know, if you're not sure, come to this area, and all through the year, this area will say, you know, month of March, these are things you could be doing. These are the latest pots, the most, I don't know, you know, the up-to-date hard landscaping materials, the veggies you could be planting, and just give some inspiration, but less choice in a way. Because I think if you're faced with a 4 or 5 acre garden centre filled with plants and a myriad of materials to, you know, from gravel to whatever, it's quite frightening in a way if you don't know what you're looking for. And I think the perception is that you've got to know a bit more about it before you can go into a garden centre. So maybe by simplifying that in some way, it might help.
No, I think it's a very fair point that you're making there, Mandy. This whole issue of editing choice on behalf of your customers, and I think that's certainly something that the good garden centres do. They know they have a reputation for helping their customers cut through the myriad of choices that they've got in their gardens. Is there another view, Paula or Dave, on this particular question of zoning and time management within garden centres?
Yeah, I think really to emphasise the point about different people on different days, one of the things we've looked at is uptake of catering offering within garden centres, and the segment, if you like, that we would call gardening elders really does tend to populate the weekday offers, whereas the family focus, the gardening prouds, it was very much more of a weekend offering. So that certainly was consistent with what we found there. And again, opportunities around kids' menus. So how prominent are they at on the Saturdays and the Sundays? You know, are they there at all? How available are high chairs? That sort of thing that can really just tip the balance and make for a happier experience for those consumers when they come in. And almost not to worry so much about that putting off perhaps the core older customers during the week.
No, as Derek says, they tend, or both of you would recognise, they tend to find their way back at the quieter times anyway. Thank you very much indeed. And you remind me, Mandy, I really like the idea of your children's garden centre, Neil, and when you've realised it, we'll get up there with a camera and get it for HTA News. Any other questions there? We're beginning to run out of time, but I've got time for one at the back there.
Hi there, Stan Green from a wholesale nursery in Scotland, dealing with a lot of retailers. And we quite often get asked, I think the under-11s get it. I think they do get it. But the problem is that very often the adults don't get it, particularly the teachers. What, if anything, is being done by the individuals on the panel, or what could be being done to convince the teachers to get the kids in, or the parents indeed?
Well, yeah, sure. Go, Mandy, go on. No, Paula. Paula, go on.
Okay, so just before the RHS talks about their programme, we operate a schools programme called Miracle Growers, and we've got online teachers packs, so the teachers can download PDFs with class programmes to support them with very simple hints and tips, because we do find that the teachers are scared, and I know I was talking to Mandy earlier on, and she's had the same experience where they're nervous perhaps about being in a situation, talking to a group of school kids and not really being that knowledgeable about the subject they're talking about. So we provide them with fact sheets online. We provide them with the schools that want to participate in the programme. We will provide support, so we have somebody who'll go in and see them. And the way we manage that, because obviously we can't cover the whole of the UK all the time, is that we pair up with garden centres and we work with them with their local communities. So the garden centre will have some support staff there, and the schools, it depends on the garden centre and how they manage it really. They'll sometimes have the schools come to them and the teachers will come in and they'll provide that support. Others will send staff from the centres out to the schools and provide them with, 2 weekly or monthly advice if they need it. It's just somebody on hand for the teachers to call if they need that help. But if you give them the pack and some information sheets, then we tend to find it works. The difficulty in the beginning is getting somebody at the school, getting the right person who's really keen and inspired and wants to do it. Because if you just send in some sheets to the office with a load of free seed and products, it just goes missing completely and doesn't get through to the children, we've found. So the best ones is where we can really partner with garden centres and provide advice and support. And then we found 2 years on, actually the support that they need diminishes because they get the confidence to work with the children, and the children themselves take over. They start driving the projects themselves, and we've worked with a few schools around the country now where the gardening clubs, in the first time we set it up 3 years ago, there were maybe a handful of children, 5 children, and I know schools now where they have to have 3 gardening clubs a week now after school because they've got too many children to have it once a week. So they've got 60 plus children who've joined it. So it's all about getting a willing adult to support you in the first place and providing that information.
Thank you very much, Paula. So, Mandy, I mean, how does the RHS sort of find that you can really engage teachers to get involved with this?
Well, I won't lie to say it is quite a struggle at times. And as you say, teachers are scared. I think they have a perception that to be able to go out in the school grounds or in their own gardens and garden, you have to be a gardener, you have to know what you're doing, and it's a shame because we all know it's not that difficult at all. So we're desperately trying to get teachers to come out with us when we go into schools and to work the garden into the curriculum and to explain to them that they don't even need to get dirty almost, to be able to use the outdoor space to teach maths and literacy and all the other topics that they have to go through to get their learning objectives and everything. We're working closely with them to work out lesson plans that they can adapt for all key stage levels. But I've got to say, from the other side of the situation, from your side, what would be wonderful is if garden centres who, the image is you've got the expertise, you've got the horticultural knowledge. If you could do more on the education side, if you could get, as you were saying, more involved with the schools, it could be a very equally, win-win situation in terms of PR. If you were shown to be giving away a few freebies to a new school that's setting up a new garden, if you could go and give a quick talk, if you could get the schools to come into you occasionally, but to embed in that it's not difficult, that it's very simple, that you can grow a broad bean or a sunflower or, just about anything really in a container with the right soil, which you sell, of course, and all those sort of messages, that it doesn't have to be extremely expensive, but you do need the right equipment, I think that the scope for PR and marketing is huge, actually, if you do get involved with the schools. And the other thing we're finding is that schools are becoming the hub of the community. If they can get a garden going and they can involve parents and they can involve allotment holders, grandparents, other members of the community, maybe special needs groups, the local children's centre, all that sort of stuff, the school actually becomes a really powerful entity within the community for spreading the word. So if they've got a big stand there saying we got all our compost from Golden Days Garden Centre down the road or whatever, I think that stands for a lot because there'll be a lot of, people seeing that. So it's really use your expertise if you could to give out. Maybe, obviously, you have to offset it with your time and your costs. My local garden centre is lucky enough to have a sort of a shed where they used to run children's parties, and they now use them for educational visits for schools to come in. And if you could find a corner of the centre to actually run something like that, I think it would be very beneficial.
Thank you, Mandy. I think, again, there's just the point of community and garden centres being able to tap into that sense of local community, whether it's in partnership with a school or some other local organisation, can give huge marketing advantage in the local market. We're going to need to wrap up, but I'd just like to, a sort of quick-fire question to Darren. We'll start off with Darren. When you see parents come in with children into Burston, which of those is the more important to you and why? Very quickly.
I think they're both as important as each other. The younger parents and the children alike. If you can keep the children happy, you keep the parents happy. If you can keep the parents happy, they'll spend more time in your garden centre. The children, obviously, we want the children to have a good experience. So whether it's from doing wildlife hunts, colouring competitions, activity days, fond memories of a garden centre will carry with them, and maybe one day when they have their children they'll revisit that centre. So there's a long-term investment with little people, and with the with their parents, of course, if you can keep the children happy and keep them entertained and the parents are more relaxed, they can spend a little bit more time walking around the centre, adding stuff to their trolleys and spending the time with the staff to get the knowledge and the help they need to give themselves their perfect garden. So both on a par, really.
Both. Darren, thank you very much indeed for that. I'll close the session there. Thank you very much for coming in and listening to what our panellists had got to say around this important topic. I think one of the key takeouts that I have is that while footfall in many of our businesses may seem to be more dominated by the older age groups, it's actually those slightly younger gardeners that have really got the spending power and really worthwhile our tapping into. The importance of children, younger children coming in with their parents and both, and I think most would probably agree with you, Darren, equally important. So thank you very much indeed to Brian Pinker from Hortipack, Darren Major from Bursting Garden Centre, Mandy from the RHS in the Northwest, Dave from HTA, and Paula from Scott's Miracle Growth. Thank you, and thank you for coming this morning.